Have you ever taken a moment to think about who wrote the script of your life? And what if what we've been taught as freedom was actually just a cage, subtly gilded? What if retirement wasn't the beginning of a free life, but rather the end of a role you never chose? You don't have to be the person they told you to be. This quote from Alan Watts echoes like a lightning bolt in the silence of the night, especially when you look back on your past and ask yourself, at what point did I stop being myself? Since childhood, we've been taught to wait for Friday, for the holidays, for the age of 65, that moment when we're supposedly going to be free. But no one ever told us that this waiting is a form of slow death. By constantly postponing life until tomorrow, we've unknowingly sacrificed the present. We all know that emptiness, sooner or later. You wake up early, face traffic, clock in, reply to emails. But deep inside, something whispers, "Is this it?" And you silence that voice with the hope that one day it will all make sense, that there will be a reward, that freedom will come. But what if that promise is a lie? What if retirement is just a sleek disguise to mask your replaceability? Today, we're going to look that illusion in the eye, deconstruct the myth of retirement as a finish line, explore the invisible architecture of the system that shapes us, and most importantly, rediscover a freedom that was never far, but which so few have dared to grasp. Are you ready? Because after this, you might never look at your daily routine the same way again. They told you freedom would come at 65. That if you worked hard. That if you stayed loyal to the job. That if you climbed the ladder step by step, one day you'd finally be free. Free to travel, to rest, to enjoy life. They painted retirement as a paradise after the struggle. But what if it was all a cleverly crafted scheme? Imagine a child holding a map in his hands, a map he never drew. They tell him, study, behave, go to university, pick a career, don't complain, work for 40 or 50 years, and then you'll get to live. That's the script, and almost everyone follows it without ever questioning it. Who wrote it? School prepares you for work. Work consumes your best years. And that famous reward, freedom, only arrives when your energy is already fading. At 65, they tell you, it's okay now, you can live. But no one warns you that it's often at this age that many people feel lost, because time has slipped away. And what was supposed to be liberating becomes anxiety-inducing. The Stanford Center on Longevity reveals that more than 2/3 of retirees in the United States feel disoriented within 18 months of retirement. It's not a money issue. It's a void, a loss of meaning, of identity, of direction. You were taught how to function, not how to live. To spin in a machine, not to exist outside of it. Retirement, contrary to what you were told, is not the peak of freedom. It is a silent exit from a role you wore for too long. And when the spotlight turns off, no one hands you a new script. You have to write it. But how can you, if no one ever taught you how? Alan Watts once said, life is like music. The point isn't to get to the end, but to dance while the music plays. Yet we spend our whole lives searching for the next track, as if the next one will be better, until the album ends. And we realize we never danced. We just waited. That's when the lie becomes visible. They never promised you freedom. They sold you a contract of obedience, with a consolation prize at the end. But that promise is empty, because you were never taught to be free. You were taught to be useful. The truth is, retirement was never made for you. It was created for productivity. In 1889, Otto von Bismarck invented retirement, not as a thank you, but to clear the workforce of the elderly and make space for the young. A political move disguised as an act of compassion. You weren't a person. You were a position, a function, a cog. And when your efficiency began to fade, you were gently released with a party, a trophy, and a forced smile. You leave the stage thinking you've been honored, when in truth, you've been dismissed. And you accept it because you've been conditioned to accept it. To believe that freedom comes after loyalty, after endurance, after exhaustion. But what if freedom was never at the end of the road? What if it was always right there in your hands, waiting for you to drop the clock, to let go of the noise, to finally listen to the silence? You never needed to wait to live. But no one ever told you that, because a free mind cannot be controlled. Silence, That's what many discover just after retirement. A heavy, uncomfortable silence. A silence that echoes between the walls of the house and inside the soul. It settles in when the alarm clock no longer has a reason to ring, when the emails stop arriving, when no one expects anything from you anymore. At first, it feels like peace, but for many, it's just emptiness in disguise. For years, you were someone, a badge, a title, a function. I'm an engineer. I'm a manager. I'm a teacher. Word that gave you a place, a sense, a value. And then, without warning, those words disappear. The automatic signature in your emails vanishes. Meetings disappear from your calendar. Appointments fade away. And then comes a question most prefer to avoid. Who am I now? According to the National Institute on Aging, cases of depression rise by over 40% in the first year of retirement. Not because people are unhappy to be free, but because they don't know what to do with that freedom. They've spent so many years being productive, being useful, being busy, that they've forgotten what it means to simply exist. John, 64, a former engineer at Boeing, wrote a heartbreaking message on a forum. I realized I never really lived. I just worked. And now that work is over, I don't know what to do. That sentence seems simple, but it carries the weight of millions of lives. Because John isn't an exception. He's a mirror, the reflection of a world that taught you how to function, but never how to feel. It's a quiet, intimate, silent crisis. You're still breathing, but something inside you feels switched off. And the most troubling part? You were never prepared for this. They talked to you about pension plans, investments, and insurance, but never about identity, never about reconstruction. No one taught you how to exist outside the frame, without a schedule, without a title, without a role. Alan Watts once said, "You are not a function. You are the very play of life." But when you played the same role for 30 or 40 years and the curtain falls and the costume is hung up, how do you create a new version of yourself? That's where the pain is born. But it's also where an opportunity begins to grow. The role is over, but the actor you is still alive, and that actor can create something new, something real. But it takes courage, the courage to dive inward, to look at the void, and to understand that it is not an end but a beginning, because in that silence lie the real questions, the ones you've pushed aside for too long. What makes me feel alive? What moves me? What would I have done if I hadn't followed the pre-written path? These questions have no ready-made answers, but they hold a hidden power, the power to spark a rebirth, the birth of a self, free from roles, a whole self. Maybe that's what freedom truly is. The freedom you've searched for your entire life, without ever knowing where to find it. From a very early age, an invisible mechanism began to shape you, not through direct orders or explicit will, but through a slow, quiet process. You learned to raise your hand to speak, to sit in rows, to memorize dates, formulas, and diagrams. Little by little, you were trained, not to think, but to obey, not to create, but to repeat. And one day, without even noticing it, you became just another part in a vast machine, a function, a role. Have you ever asked yourself who decided the structure of your life? This idea of a segmented existence, school, work, retirement, death, that's not a natural order. It's a construction. In the late 19th century, Otto von Bismarck introduced retirement, not out of compassion, but to remove the elderly and make room for the young. A management strategy disguised as a gesture of kindness.